She told me I'd forget her, but how could I forget the woman who taught me everything? I first noticed her on an ordinary evening, the kind of night that slips quietly into memory without fanfare. My friend had invited me over for a small gathering, just a few people, laughter spilling softly from the living room into the kitchen where she stood. She moved with an effortless grace, the kind of poise that doesn't demand attention but quietly commands it anyway. I remember how the soft glow of the kitchen light caught her hair, warm chestnut tones glinting as she shifted to pour a cup of tea. She laughed at something my friend said, a light, melodious sound that seemed to linger in the air longer than it should. I found myself watching the subtle movements, how she brushed a stray lock of hair behind her ear, the delicate curve of her fingers, the way her blouse draped softly over her shoulders. There was a calm warmth in her presence, a quiet confidence that didn't need to announce itself. Yet, beneath that poise, I sensed something tender, something vulnerable, a depth that made me pause, made me want to notice more, to understand her. When our eyes met briefly, it felt like a spark neither of us could name. Not a bold, passionate fire, but something quieter, more insistent, a recognition of sorts, that perhaps we both understood there was more beneath the surface than a casual acquaintance should see. Her smile was subtle, almost teasing, but it lingered in my chest long after she looked away. I caught the faint scent of vanilla and cedar, soft and comforting, leaving an invisible trace wherever she moved. Every gesture, every small motion, seemed imbued with care, the tilt of her head as she listened, the gentle nod when someone spoke, the way she rested her hand lightly on the counter. It was ordinary in action but extraordinary in effect. I wanted to speak to her, to ask a question, to say something clever, but my tongue seemed to stall, caught somewhere between respect and curiosity, admiration and caution. I was painfully aware of the age gap, of the social boundary, of the fact that she was my friend's mother. And yet, I couldn't look away. There was a pull, subtle and unrelenting, that drew my attention and refused to let it go. That evening ended as quietly as it began, but the impression she left stayed. I didn't realize then how deeply that first glance, that single shared laugh, that fleeting touch of presence, would settle into my memory and remain there, quietly shaping every thought I would later have about her. Even at that moment, I felt it, the undeniable sense that meeting her was no ordinary encounter. The next time I saw her, it was by chance, or maybe it wasn't. I had gone to my friend's house to drop off some notes for a class we shared, and she happened to be in the kitchen again, humming softly as she organized the counter. There was a quiet rhythm to her movements, the kind that made you feel both welcome and unworthy of the effortless ease she exuded. She looked up as I entered, and her smile caught me off guard. Not the playful teasing from before, but something warmer, something more personal, as if she remembered not just me, but the small details of my presence. I handed over the notes, and she held them lightly in her hands, pausing for just a moment longer than necessary, her fingers brushing mine. It was nothing dramatic, just a touch, but it lingered like a chord struck softly in the quiet of the room. We began talking about trivial things at first, the weather, the latest neighborhood news, a small comment about my friend's stubbornness. But even in that casual chatter, there was a strange intimacy, a sense of shared space that was impossible to ignore. She listened in a way that made every word I said feel heavier, more significant. Her eyes, deep and steady, didn't just see me, they acknowledged me. I felt like a confessional, a diary opened in front of someone who understood the weight of silence as much as the weight of words. At one point, she asked for my opinion on something, a recipe she was trying, a book she was considering, even a casual observation about her living room arrangement. I hesitated, surprised by the sincerity in her tone. There was no patronizing, no dismissive laughter. Just genuine interest, like she valued my input in a way that made me feel unexpectedly adult, unexpectedly important. And then it happened again, our hands brushed lightly as she reached for the same jar on the counter. Neither of us pulled away immediately. There was a quiet pause, a breath held between us, and I noticed the subtle warmth of her hand, the smooth texture of her skin, the faint scent of her perfume mingling with the aroma of fresh coffee. My chest tightened in response, a strange mix of exhilaration and guilt. admiration and longing. For the first time, I allowed myself to think beyond mere respect or friendship. I noticed the curve of her smile, the tilt of her head, the way her presence seemed to command the room without ever demanding it. And yet, I knew the line was there, the invisible one drawn by age, by social expectation, by unspoken propriety. As I left that day, her laughter trailed me to the door, lingering in the air like a soft echo. I walked away with a strange ache in my chest, both thrilling and torturous. For the first time, I realized that these moments, these small, fleeting interactions, were becoming more than memories. They were beginning to define the way I saw her, and slowly, they were starting to define me too. A few days later, I found myself back at her home under the pretense of helping my friend with some work, but this time, it wasn't just about the task at hand. She invited me into the kitchen again, and as we worked side by side chopping vegetables and stirring sauces, there was a shift in the air. The usual lightheartedness gave way to something quieter, more intimate. Her voice, usually steady and assured, carried a hint of fatigue I hadn't noticed before. She spoke of things she rarely let anyone see, the stress of balancing a career with family life, the loneliness that crept in during quiet evenings, the small regrets that lingered like shadows she couldn't quite shake. Her words weren't dramatic or overwrought, but they carried weight, each syllable hinting at the emotional labor she bore alone. I listened, carefully, wanting to offer something, anything, that might ease the heaviness I saw etched subtly into her features. At one point, she paused mid-sentence and looked at me, a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. Without thinking, I reached out and placed my hand lightly over hers on the counter. The contact was brief, yet it lingered in a way that startled me. Her skin was warm, soft, and her pulse felt faintly under my fingertips, steady yet vulnerable. She didn't pull away, instead, she let her fingers rest against mine for a moment longer than necessary, and I felt a quiet gratitude in her gaze. Her voice softened as she continued talking, and I realized how much I wanted to be the person she could confide in without judgment. The room seemed smaller somehow, the sounds of sizzling pans and distant laughter muted against the intensity of this quiet connection. I noticed the faint scent of her perfume mixed with the aroma of the meal, and it wrapped around me, grounding me in the moment. I wanted to say something that would ease the tension, acknowledge the depth of what she was sharing, but I stayed silent, letting my presence speak instead. I brushed a strand of hair behind her ear when it fell across her face, a gesture so subtle it could have gone unnoticed, yet it felt intimate in the quiet of the kitchen. By the time I left that day, I carried with me more than just gratitude for her trust. I carried a new awareness. She was not just the graceful, confident figure I had admired from a distance, but a woman of layers, of vulnerabilities and strengths intertwined. And with that awareness came an undeniable pull, a desire to protect her, to be near her, and a complicated sense of longing that was entirely inappropriate, and entirely impossible to ignore. It was one of those evenings that felt suspended in time, a soft, golden glow spilling across the room from the setting sun, painting everything in shades of warmth. My friend had gone out briefly, leaving me alone with her to tidy up the living room. At first, it was casual, routine even, but the air between us felt charged in a way I couldn't quite name. We moved around each other with an unspoken rhythm, brushing past one another as we straightened cushions and arranged books. Each accidental touch lingered just a fraction longer than necessary. My hand grazed hers when passing a stack of magazines, and I felt a subtle warmth spread through my chest, a quiet jolt that made my stomach twist in anticipation. She didn't pull away, instead, she gave a small, almost imperceptible smile, and for a moment, it felt like she acknowledged the tension just as much as I did. Later, we stepped out onto the small balcony to admire the sunset. The sky was a brilliant wash of orange and pink, clouds glowing like embers. She leaned slightly against the railing, and I found myself standing closer than necessary, drawn to her presence. I could feel the warmth radiating from her body, subtle but persistent, mingling with the fading heat of the sun. The breeze played with her hair, brushing it across her cheek, and without thinking, I reached out to gently tuck it behind her ear. She didn't step back, her eyes softened, and a quiet intimacy passed between us that neither words nor gestures could fully express. Our conversation slowed, filled with pauses that spoke volumes. She asked what I thought of the sunset, and I realized I wasn't really looking at the sky, I was watching her. The way her profile caught the fading light, the curve of her lips as she smiled, the gentle rise and fall of her chest as she breathed, it all drew me in with a magnetic pull I struggled to resist. Even a simple laugh between us carried weight now. I noticed the subtle brush of her hand on mine when she laughed at something I said, the way her fingers lingered on mine for a heartbeat longer than politeness allowed. It was fleeting, almost inconsequential to anyone else, but to me, it was everything, a silent admission of connection, a spark of something unspoken but undeniable. By the time the evening ended, I was acutely aware of the line we hadn't crossed, of the boundaries we hadn't dared to breach, and yet, of the impossible pull between us. The tension didn't scare me, it thrilled me. Each lingering touch, each shared glance, each quiet smile was a promise of something deeper, something forbidden, intimate, and breathtakingly real. And for the first time, I understood that slow-burn desire could be just as consuming as anything overt, because it lingered in every pause, every gesture, every silent moment between us. The days that followed our quiet balcony moment were heavy with thoughts I couldn't shake. Every interaction with her seemed to carry more weight, more significance, than it had before. I caught myself replaying our accidental touches, the brush of her hand against mine, the way her eyes lingered just a moment too long. Each memory was a spark, igniting feelings I had no right to entertain. It wasn't just desire, I felt something more complicated. Admiration, respect, longing, and guilt all tangled together in a confusing knot. I was painfully aware of the age gap, of the fact that she was my friend's mother, of the societal boundaries we weren't supposed to cross. Yet, the pull between us refused to be ignored. Even ordinary moments, helping carry groceries, passing in the hallway, sharing a casual laugh, felt electric. One afternoon, she asked me to help rearrange a few things in her living room. We moved slowly, side by side, our hands occasionally brushing against each other as we adjusted furniture. I could feel the subtle warmth of her skin, the texture of her sweater beneath my fingers, the faint scent of her perfume that clung to the air like a whispered memory. Each touch was innocuous to an observer, but to me, it was charged with unspoken tension. I hesitated with every movement, questioning whether my reactions were simply nerves or something deeper. Her awareness of my hesitation didn't go unnoticed. She teased me lightly about being quiet, her voice carrying that same warmth and gentle authority that had first drawn me in. I blushed, fumbling for words, caught between wanting to respond honestly and the fear of overstepping invisible boundaries. The unspoken connection was growing, yet the moral and social lines we both knew existed hovered over every gesture, every glance. Even in quiet moments alone, I felt my mind replaying her smile, the tilt of her head, the softness of her voice. I was acutely aware of the tension that existed between desire and propriety, the delicate balance between closeness and restraint. There was a longing to reach out, to bridge the space between us, yet a simultaneous, almost reflexive caution. By evening, as I left her home, my chest was heavy with conflicting emotions. The ache of desire mingled with the guilt of impropriety, and the anticipation of seeing her again became almost unbearable. It was a slow, simmering tension, not fueled by impulsive passion, but by the quiet, persistent weight of connection. I understood then that our bond wasn't simple, wasn't fleeting, it was a careful dance between admiration, longing, and restraint. And the deeper I felt, the more I feared, and simultaneously yearned, for the moment when the unspoken could no longer remain hidden. It happened one quiet evening, the kind that seems to stretch time itself. My friend had gone out again, leaving just the two of us alone in the living room, the city lights spilling through the windows in soft, scattered patterns. We were sitting across from each other, not touching, yet every glance, every subtle movement carried weight. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, it was loaded, full of unspoken words that both of us seemed to feel but neither dared to voice. She spoke first, her tone gentle but tinged with something fragile. "Do you think you'll forget me?" The question was casual in phrasing, but the vulnerability in her eyes betrayed the depth of what she really meant. I felt my chest tighten. How could I explain the way she had quietly become a part of me, the way her presence lingered in my thoughts long after I left? I reached out, almost instinctively, my hand hovering briefly before I gently touched hers. The contact was light, comforting, and intimate without words. She didn't pull away. Instead, she let her fingers rest against mine, and I felt the steady warmth of her skin, the subtle pulse beneath her hand, as if her heartbeat were a quiet echo of my own. "I could never forget you," I said softly, my voice steady but low, trembling slightly under the weight of the truth. "How could I forget the woman who taught me everything? Who made me understand more than I ever realized about life, about kindness, about being seen?" My words hung in the air, honest and unpolished, yet somehow exactly right. Her eyes softened, glimmering in the dim light. A slow, quiet smile spread across her face, the kind that carried relief, gratitude, and something tenderly intimate. She leaned slightly closer, just enough for our shoulders to brush, and I felt the warmth radiate through me. The small gesture, nothing more than a near touch, was heavier than any declaration could be. It was trust, acknowledgement, and unspoken longing, all contained in a moment that neither of us wanted to end. We stayed like that for a while, the city lights flickering across her features, casting shadows and highlights that made her seem both impossibly real and quietly ethereal. Every laugh, every sigh, every pause in conversation deepened the connection, building a bridge of honesty that neither age nor circumstance could erase. By the time the evening drew to a close, the tension had shifted. It was no longer just desire or longing, it was understanding, acceptance, and a profound emotional intimacy. I left with my heart full, carrying the warmth of her presence and the weight of words that had finally been spoken. That night, I realized that love didn't always need grand gestures. Sometimes, it was the quiet, honest truths, the gentle touches, the lingering looks that defined it most. The days after our quiet confession felt lighter somehow, yet deeper in meaning. There was no rush, no frantic gestures or dramatic declarations, just a gentle, unspoken understanding that had settled between us, like sunlight filtering softly through a window, warming everything it touched. Our interactions remained subtle but meaningful, each touch, glance, or smile carrying the weight of what we had shared without needing to name it. I found myself noticing her in new ways, not with the desperate longing of before, but with a quiet appreciation for her presence, her warmth, and the steady confidence that had always drawn me in. When we spoke, there was a new ease in the conversation, a rhythm that felt natural and unforced. Our hands brushed lightly more often now, lingering just enough to feel significant without stepping beyond the boundaries we both respected. A gentle touch on the back as we passed each other, a shared laugh that made the room feel smaller, more intimate, these small gestures were our language now, spoken in glances, pauses, and subtle warmth. One evening, we sat together on the balcony, the city lights below twinkling like scattered stars. She leaned back slightly against the railing, and I found myself instinctively moving closer, not to invade her space, but to simply share it. The warmth of her presence, the soft scent of her perfume, the quiet rise and fall of her breathing, it all grounded me in a way that was comforting and exhilarating at once. We didn't speak for a long time, but the silence wasn't empty. It was full of trust, affection, and the quiet acknowledgement that our connection had grown into something enduring. When she touched my arm lightly as she laughed at something I said, I felt a surge of warmth through my chest. It wasn't desire alone, it was affection, gratitude, and a deep respect for the woman she was. Her hand lingered for a heartbeat longer, and in that small contact, there was everything, the shared history, the understanding, the subtle intimacy that had blossomed over weeks of quiet moments. Even when I left her home that night, the connection lingered. I could feel it in the memory of her hand brushing mine, the sound of her laughter, the warmth of her presence that had somehow settled into my chest. It wasn't a love defined by urgency or recklessness, it was steady, respectful, and deeply human. By the story's end, we had both grown, both learned, and both found a way to cherish each other without breaking the world around us. The tension had softened into warmth, the longing into quiet companionship. And in the lingering moments of closeness, in the shared smiles and subtle touches, I understood that some connections, quiet, honest, and deeply felt, were meant to last far beyond the fleeting passage of time. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more slow burn romance stories. And tell me in the comments, have you ever experienced a connection that changed you forever?